Let's begin our discussion of each of the specific types of epithelial tissue. You'll notice in this table I've underlined the most important aspects of each of these tissues. So we can take this relatively large amount of information and condense it down into some of the more pertinent facts about this tissue. So the first thing to note is the name. The name of this tissue is called simple squamous epithelium. What that means is it's a single layer of flat cells. Depending on how you look at that layer, sometimes it looks like a tiled floor, if you will. That's because you're looking down at the surface of the cells. If you were to turn these cells over and look at it sideways, they would look very, very thin. Okay? So where would you find this simple squamous epithelium? Well, one is it lines the inside of your cardiovascular system. So on the inside lining of your heart and the inside lining of blood vessels, you have this very thin layer of cells. In those organs, we call that the endothelium. Okay? Endo means inside, so it's an inside lining of the cardiovascular and the lymphatic system. One other location is in membranes known as serous membranes. The body has 3 serous membranes, which are these double-layered membranes. They include the peritoneum, which is in your abdomen, the pleura, which surrounds your lungs, and the pericardium, which surrounds your heart. This membrane, or these membranes, are often called the mesothelium. And then finally, a really important area where you find this is in the air sacs of your lungs. The air sacs of your lungs are known as alveoli. That is A-L-V-E-O-L-I. Alveoli. The alveoli of your lungs are the little tiny air sacs. And if you think about what has to happen there, it should make sense as to why this needs to be a simple squamous epithelium. The air sacs of your lungs must allow diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide. And in order to allow that diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide, the air sacs have to have a very, very thin layer to them. So what I want you to try to do is ask yourself why. Why would this organ have to have this type of tissue forming it? And typically, this tissue is simple squamous in order to allow diffusion of materials. The next tissue is known as simple cuboidal. The only difference is the shape of the cells. The cells are more cube-shaped as opposed to flat. This tissue is used to make a lot of little tubes in the body. One example is in your kidneys. Your kidneys have these little tiny tubes in them called kidney tubules. There are also little ducts that help transport secretions that are made up of simple cuboidal tissue. Your sweat glands have these little ducts. There are little ducts that are also found in your pancreas that are made up of simple cuboidal epithelial tissue. So if you take these little tubes in the kidney and cut through them, they would look like these. So these are little tubes that have been cross-sectioned, and they are formed. You can see this is a single layer of square cells. Here is a single layer of square cells. The inside of those tubules is called the lumen, and those are great examples of where you would find simple cuboidal epithelium. The next one is simple columnar epithelium, and it comes in a couple different varieties. Sometimes it'll have cilia, which are little hair-like structures. Sometimes it'll have microvilli, which are little finger-like extensions. But a simple columnar is a single layer of column-shaped cells. In this drawing, there's these tall column-shaped cells. This one happens to have microvilli, which are these little tiny finger-like extensions. Why would you need these little finger-like extensions? Well, what that microvilli does is it increases, the surface area. And one example of where you need a high surface area is in your small intestines. And that's because your small intestines have to absorb large amounts of nutrients into the body. You might also find a cell called a goblet cell. Goblet cells are found in a lot of our epithelial tissues. Goblet cells produce mucus. So there needs to be a thin layer of mucus in our digestive system. There needs to be a thin layer of mucus in our respiratory tract and our urinary tract. So you'll find some of these single-celled mucus producers in that lining of the epithelium. So where would you find this simple columnar epithelium? You would find it lining your GI tract, some ducts, some glands, and gallbladder. This, I again will mention, has microvilli, where this next simple columnar has cilia. Notice the cilia looks a little more hair-like than the microvilli. Completely different function as well. Cilia are not used to increase surface area, but they're used to move something along the surface. So the cilia kind of move back and forth and push something along the surface. And once you know where this epithelium is found, it should make sense. One place you would find ciliated simple columnar is in your respiratory tract. And what the cilia move is mucus. So when you breathe in particulates, it gets stuck in the mucus. And then the cilia move the mucus so those particulates don't get down into your lungs. So lining of the respiratory tract, like your bronchioles, is a good example of where you would find this. Bronchioles are the smaller tubes of the respiratory tract. You also find this type of tissue in fallopian tubes. So here's a drawing of a female uterus and ovary. This little tube here is a fallopian tube. It has to move the egg that has been released from the ovary through the tube towards the uterus. So you will find ciliated simple columnar in the uterine tubes, and it helps move that egg through the tube. The next video is going to talk about the rest of the epithelial tissue, including the pseudostratified columna.